and I
Yeah.
believe that it's going live. I can always chop the start of this off of the recorded version if it turns out that there is a whole lot of dead, empty space, but I believe that
You
at
be-
this point we are
believe
live. I'm
you
going
believe
to.
it's going live?
I
Okay.
believe it is, but you never know. You never know. We might be
Fair
live.
enough.
Yeah, I think we're live now. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Libertarian Infighting. Here we are with Diego from the TheDDVShow. They are an objectivist podcast. Now, you might have seen relatively recently that I did a epic takedown of Ayn Rand, just destroyed with facts and logic, and Diego's here to defend the good lady's honor. Is that about right, Diego?
That is incorrect. I do not care about her honor. I am just here to defend my view of the philosophy that I follow. Ayn Rand's personal business is her business, and I don't care a bit about it.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So essentially with the review that I did of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, if you didn't see it, I was broadly positive, but I had some criticisms of the philosophy espoused, and I also noted that she calls herself not a libertarian, and in fact has a lot of really nasty, mean things to say about libertarianism, calling us the lowest sort and all that kind of thing. So one of the first things that I wanted to do on this episode of Libertarian Infighting is to figure out whether, in fact, we are doing libertarian infighting. Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand books in general are often cited as some of the first books that libertarians should read, but nonetheless, she calls herself not a libertarian. So I guess the first question, Diego, is, you're an objectivist. Are you a libertarian?
Am I a libertarian? That will have to be a hard no on that, but I'm pretty sure that you already figured I was going to say that, right?
Yes. So,
Yes.
okay. My first question in that case, going past the one I already knew, is, so Gary Johnson is considered a libertarian. There are some really broadly non-libertarian positions that he has. He's in favor of anti-discrimination laws, for one, and nonetheless, he is counted as a libertarian, right? A lot of people who favor a lot of state intervention still counted as libertarian because they are broadly in favor of free markets and because they are generally opposed to government intrusion into our lives. And that seems to be enough for most people to call someone a libertarian. Wouldn't that describe you?
Oh, good Lord! We're already starting with the deep questions. Well,
Right into it.
the one thing I'm going to avoid in this interview here is I'm not going to be hung up on terms. That's not one thing that I want to do. So, if your definition of libertarian means free markets, is that basically what you're encapsulating right there? A free market?
Seems to be the common
Okay.
way of looking at it by laymen.
So if we're going to go with the term free market, as you may understand it, then objectivism is friendly with that idea. Absolutely. I am 100% for laissez-faire capitalism. 100%. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, in that case, what differentiates libertarianism and objectivism according to you, and maybe according to the good lady herself?
Okay, so what differentiates these two terms, libertarianism and objectivism, is that objectivism is a set of basically guidelines. It's a philosophy that Ayn Rand has developed over her lifetime. And it is a full philosophy. It encompasses metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, which I'm sure you might be familiar with, and the most oft forgotten branch of the tree, which is my favorite, aesthetics. So, and libertarians, well, without getting too adversarial, I can't find two libertarians that can tell me what a Genesis definition of what that term means. But in this context, I will say libertarians are concerned with the politics branch of life, and objectivism is just a broad philosophy which encompasses everything. Now, when it comes to matters of particulars, such as should a government do X, can lawyers do X, borders this, borders that, those are outside the providence of philosophy. You have to have a set of ideas to arrive to concrete answers to these conceptual questions, but objectivism stops once the questions become too defined. So, for instance, Objectivism holds the individual as a standard. So in general, any policy that is made in a scientific branch of politics would have to have as its standard the individual. But the outcome of those actions in law would not be objectivism. Those would be a specific science of law or government.
Okay.
Does that answer anything? I can clarify something if you like.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the key takeaways I got from there is something I heard Ayn Rand talk about in a few of the interviews and things I've seen since I read Atlas Shrugged, where she says that libertarians don't, to put it as simply as possible, don't focus enough on the philosophy, right? They don't have a solid philosophical underpinning. They're just sort of a bit too pragmatic in their approach. They don't go deep enough. There are different branches of libertarianism that have different foundational philosophies, right? You have like your Lysander Spooner and Murray Rothbard, that sort of natural rights libertarianism. You do have the more consequentialist David Friedman, Milton Friedman, Michael Humer kind of libertarians, and they certainly exist too. Given that there are so many different philosophical underpinnings for the free market position that libertarianism seems to encapsulate. Last point on terminology, and then we'll move on.
Yes.
Couldn't you still just say that objectivism is a branch of libertarianism, or one type of libertarianism that has, in your view, the only solid philosophy? Then again, in the view of Lysander Spooner or Milton Friedman, they would say they have the only solid version of the philosophy to get to the free market libertarian position. Like, why do you split yourself off when the other foundational philosophies don't, is the question.
Because the other foundational philosophies aren't philosophies and they're not foundational. Well, you will have 200 libertarians try to tell you their positions, but the issue is that the values they choose are 100% subjective. It's how they feel, or at worst, they may see some concretes in reality. Some examples, and then without a proper way to induce their ideas into a burgeoning all-encompassing concept, you're going to have some libertarians want a free market without a government, and some libertarians want a free market with a limited government, and they can't decide on what the answer is because the standard for their conclusions are based entirely on their emotions, on their whims. It's not based on reality.
Okay.
Objectivism is completely ruthless. I could guarantee you that after this is done, I'm going to have 15 much more educated objectivists go right up my ass and down my throat about the things I'm saying. And honesty is a big virtue. If I'm wrong, I have to correct myself.
All right, fair enough. So, okay, that's something that takes a lot of discussion, I think, to get to the bottom of. If you're saying, well, the reason objectivists are not libertarians is because you think that the differences in the philosophy are fundamental enough that you go to a completely different place, you get to a much deeper root than any of the libertarian philosophies, you would count yourself thereby not a libertarian. Am I getting that about right?
Yes. In the essence, this may not be satisfactory, but objectivists as a philosophy do not hold any political view. We don't adhere to any political party. But in general, the conclusions we come to are objective. It's a relationship between human consciousness and reality. And most libertarians I've come across either focus on reality apart from the mind or the mind apart from reality. They create a dichotomy, and that creates a lot of cognitive issues in their conclusions.
Interesting. It's worth saying that I think I do have a foundational philosophy, and I do not consider myself like a mind-body dualist of any kind. But that's maybe something we can get into a little bit later. Okay, so since you've now talked up this philosophy of objectivism so heavily, you've started to saying how, it blows everything else out of the water. You answer questions we didn't even know existed. So let's start getting to the root of that. What about objectivism? So what's the starting point of objectivism? What's your first sort of premise from which you build this philosophy?
Oh, my good Lord. See, I'm not trying to be assuming too much, but you ask a very honest and direct question, and depending where I want to come at this depends on how convoluted my answer might be, but where do I derive my conclusions through objectivism? Basically, it would have to be, oh, geez, it sounds so academic, but it would have to be, well, it's sense data. You get senses, you take sensations from reality, and we interpret that into percepts. So reality comes in through us by our eyes, ears, nose, fingers. Our body integrates that into perceptions, the nervous system, and then the mind, the human mind, apart from non-rational animals, they're able to form concepts from the information we get from reality.
Okay.
And okay. So the issue is with objectivists. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to speak of objectivists as a broad term or broad people, but all views I have today are my interpretation of the ideas. So I only represent myself today.
Okay. I just want to pause you
All
there.
right.
You're making
Yes.
objectivists sound pretty scary if you're like constantly hedging to get your fellow objectivists to not jump on you.
Because for the first time in my life, I take honesty and integration seriously, and these things do matter to me.
Okay.
So humans then have a concept, but what we are the only animal we are able to evade reality. So some humans can see reality and then pretend it's not how it is and live our lives with our nose up in the air and evade reality. Some people will just stick nose first in the dirt, live by reality, but they're going to evade their concepts. But objectivism takes that dichotomy and throws it in a dumpster. No, reality and your mind are one. We're in reality, and humans need to adhere to the laws or rules of reality by sussing out any contradictions of what you have in your mind to what's out there in reality. So
Okay.
it's ruthless, it's hard, it's thinking, and most of the time, I can tell you, I got into objectivism when I was 35, and 99% of the time, I'm sitting here ruthlessly destroying my old conclusions, and you have to have good self-esteem to do that.
Okay.
It's hard to, yeah.
So you keep coming back to, as is unsurprising in a philosophy called objectivism, coming back to the concepts of objective versus subjective. I've found that these things, sorry, I'm going to have to go back to definitions again. These things are things that often get defined quite sloppily, and so I want to know what you specifically mean. What is it to say that something is objective versus subjective?
Okay, in the simplest terms, objective means a relationship between a human consciousness and reality. And even saying that term makes it sound like I'm endorsing a dichotomy, but no. Objectivism states that the mind and reality are in the same existence. Subjectivists, what they do is they take in reality, but they don't trust their senses. They've been taught. Remember I told you earlier about evasions? Even though subjectivists have to live in reality, they can't walk through walls. They can't talk to the Aryan race. They can't do any of these weird fucking things they say they can do. They still come to conclusions that, as Immanuel Kant says, that my mind is a projector projecting out reality. I don't know if you're real or not. I can't trust my senses. I can't trust my mind. So even though I live through reality, I have to evade that fact to exist. So a subjectivist basically lives by their emotions. An objectivist has to keep their impulses in check to make sure they have no contradictions in their thinking. So subjectivists are emotion-based. Objectivists are reality-based, between reality and the mind.
Okay. You're making a distinction between subjectivists and objectivists. Is that comprehensive? Like, if you're not an objectivist, does that make you a subjectivist?
No, technically, you're only an objectivist if you follow the fundamentals of this philosophy. If you say you follow objectivism and you don't follow the fundamentals, you're not an objectivist. Also, 99% of this planet live through reality and they try to make sense of the world. Mm-hmm. It takes an act of corrupt education to convince people, either through religion or through the collective, that their individuality does not matter and they have to evade. This is put beautifully by Neil deGrasse Tyson, great philosopher of our time, who has stated that children are born and they are inquisitive. They want to know how the world works. They ask questions, but it takes an act of progressive, mind-destructive education to convince the children that their mind is not efficacious. So people are born into the world ready to know it. It takes an act of evil from other humans to convince them otherwise.
Okay. The reason that I asked if it was comprehensive is because by the way you're describing things, I think I would describe myself as neither an objectivist or a subjectivist, because the thing you're describing there of subjectivism, where things are based on emotions. Like, no, not solely. I think that our emotions exist, and so the knowledge that emotions exist can cause me to come to some conclusions, like any piece of data about reality can. But I don't foundationally base my idea of what is on what I feel ought to be, right? But then again, that's because I think that there is an is-ought distinction. That statements about what is and statements about what ought to be are fundamentally bifurcated in that way. That you can stack any number of is statements that you like, and you will not get to an ought unless one of those statements is an ought statement. Your conclusion cannot have an ought in it. And it's probably a good time to get into that. So
Yes, sir.
one of my main criticisms of objectivism in that video that I did was if I say that, I'm sleepy, so I should drink some coffee. Well, that has implied in there the assumption that I ought to not be sleepy anymore. So in that situation, you'd have to say, well, there's an ought statement as a premise already in order to get an ought statement at the end. If I am understanding objectivism correctly, you guys reject that. You say you can just stack a whole bunch of is's and get an ought at the end. Is that true? Am I misunderstanding?
No, everything that you said is a complete misunderstanding.
Okay.
So, okay. See, I am what I call a blue-collar philosopher. I don't learn these things to teach others. I just learn these things for my own life. So I don't get too deep into these issues.
Well, you're in an interview now.
Yes, keeping that in mind. When it comes to the is-ought gap, that comes from a long line of Christian philosophers who believed that reality was split into two realms, basically heaven and earth. And the thinkers of the Enlightenment, like Hume, Mr. Is-ought
the
himself,
atheist.
yes. Hume, Kant, Marx, all these people, they're Christian. They were
No, they were not. Hume was an atheist.
They were wrestling with a morality of Christianity. They could not shake it. So what? See, we're good with definitions. Like, do they go to church and worship Jesus? No.
Well, they don't believe. Hume didn't believe in God.
The world they grew up in taught them a morality that only had. The Christian morality was an axiom at that time, and humanity at that time was kind of coming out of the swamp of 1,500 years of religion. So these people still had a morality of Christianity, secularized. Like Einstein, when Einstein would do his equations, and he would always make room for God because he just couldn't shake it.
Okay, well, hold on.
So the is-ought is a dichotomy between reality and heaven. So how people's lives were directed came from orders, dogmas, commandments. So how do you derive what a human can do if you don't know what God is commanding? That was the issue. And objectivism states that this is a false dichotomy. There is no is-ought dichotomy. The human mind.
We're getting away from my question, though.
No. The human mind. I know. I'm getting worried. That's what I'm trying not to do.
Okay.
But the human mind. Trust me. The human mind and reality are one. You have to have a standard for all your actions. Everything you do, you have to have a standard to measure from. This is how concepts work. So the standard for all living things is to live or die. Humans have to also make this fundamental choice to live or die. Humans, though, unlike other animals, we have a special tool called our reasoning capability. We need to be able to think and act accordingly to survive. Now, the is-ought states that if I want to have a job, I ought to do certain actions. Now, why do I want to have a job? Because I need money to feed myself. Why do I have to eat? Because I'm going to die. The standard always goes back to your requirements to survive. So the original is-ought gap is there because there's no standard. The standard is a floating God somewhere, whether it's a secularized version or not. Objectivism says, nope, if you want to produce certain outcomes, you have to take certain actions.
A lot of that was about the history of this philosophy.
Yes.
And
Okay.
I'm not sure that I'd agree with the description, but I also don't quite think it matters. Because the criticism I'm bringing is, if David Hume was inspired by Christian morality, which I doubt, but let's say that that's the case. Nonetheless, my criticism is that you have is and ought, right? So, for example, you said that in order to not die, I need to do X and Y and Z, and therefore I ought to do X and Y and Z. However,
Yes.
that assumes that you ought not die. And granted, that is an assumption that I agree with. So I'm quite happy to take that one. But it is an assumption. So you do have an ought as a premise initially in your argument.
What do you mean? I'm sorry. So what was the assumption again?
That you ought not die. Why not? Why shouldn't you die?
Why would I? I don't understand. Why would you come to the conclusion that I would die?
That you should die? I don't necessarily think you should die. I'm saying that if you're going to end with I ought to do X, Y, and Z, and your premise is, because otherwise I'll die, encapsulated in there is the premise that you ought to die. You ought not to die. And
yes, that's the fundamental choice. The is ought also pertains to daily things. Like I said earlier,
but
if you want to receive a paycheck, you have to go to work. You have to do certain things.
But hold on, you're now accepting the is ought distinction by the sounds of things. If you're agreeing that you need that initial ought in the argument to begin with, the assumption that you ought not die, right? Then you're agreeing that there is an is ought distinction because
no, I told you that there.
But if there wasn't, hold on, because if there was no is ought distinction, you would not need an ought in the argument to begin with. But you do have an ought in the argument to begin with, and you seem to agree you need it.
Well, the ought is a value you're trying to seek. You have to seek something. You have to seek values. And I said earlier that even though I use the term is ought, these are terms that are loaded. That there is no is ought. There is no dichotomy between the thoughts you have and the actions you need to take to achieve these values. They're one and the same. If you want to achieve a value, you have to do something. We're not ghosts. We're not immortal. We live on a physical plane. But the is ought is not. They're not two separate things. They're one in the same. If I want to achieve long-term, non-contradictory joy as a human being, I need to be able to use my mind, to be rational. That is human nature. There is no way around that.
If they're one and the same thing, then why can't you get? I can definitely get from a bunch of is's to another is, and I can get from a combination of is's and oughts to another ought, but I don't think I can get from just a bunch of is's to an ought. If that's the case, well then, why? If you can't get to an ought from a bunch of is's, you seem to agree that there's an is-ought distinction. Do you not? Because that's all it's saying. That's the whole claim, and you don't seem to give a counterexample.
Yes, it's the is-ought. You see the is-ought as two dots floating in space. For me, the is-ought's a line. You start somewhere, and you're trying to achieve a value. They're one construct. You just have to start somewhere and then end up somewhere. This line, though, needs a standard for how you get there, how you achieve that value. So it's not like there's two dots and I just magically could go to any dot I want. It is a single connected line. Is at the start, ought at the end, but it's one thing.
Okay. Well, I don't want to stick on that forever. So let's try to move on. And okay, so there's a couple of other issues that I have. One of them was an inherent consequentialism that I find in pretty much every moral philosophy. Because every moral philosophy sells itself by saying, if you follow my moral philosophy, you'll get a whole lot of good results. Right? If there really was a philosophy that would say that it doesn't matter what the results are, you should still do what my philosophy says you should do, then the story that they could tell would have their philosophy being followed, the results being awful, and they would still think that that should be convincing. But nonetheless, including in Ayn Rand, they show people following a philosophy, it works out well for everyone involved. People not following her philosophy, and it works out terribly for everyone involved. if consequentialism is not the ultimate standard of morality, you know, what's kind of good for everyone, as scary as that might sound to an objectivist, then why does the story always seem to follow that pattern? Why does the story always show the good things happening to everyone when her philosophy is followed?
Are you asking why doesn't everyone follow a tried and true philosophy as
No.
opposed to the wrong ones?
No, I'm trying to say that. So my philosophy of ethics is consequentialism. I think that there is a clear way to describe a good outcome versus a bad one, and we ought to act towards getting good ones.
Yes.
Right. So I define good and bad based on the fulfilled values of everyone involved, not just yourself. Right? I think.
Fair enough. Okay.
So of everyone involved, it's a kind of utilitarianism in that regard. Though I shy away from the term sometimes because there's
I know.
There's a lot of bullshit around that term. So
I didn't bring it up. I know.
No, I know. I'm just saying it for the lovely people at home. Anyway, so if you have that sort of consequentialist view, then it would make sense to say, well, look, here's what would happen if everyone followed my philosophy. Here's what would happen if they didn't. My philosophy clearly has the correct set of actions at the end, sort of the correct set of outcomes at the end. We all like this. It's good for everyone. Therefore, let's follow mine. If, however, you had a philosophy that really said that you should only do what's beneficial for yourself, right? You should, then surely you could describe a situation in which it works out terribly for everyone except for the one person acting, and still say that, well, yeah, that is an example of what you should do in my philosophy.
I would have to hear an example for that. I am in agreement that as an egoist, I am completely in it for my values, and anyone else's benefit would be a consequence of my values. They're not the primary. What kind of situation would I have to do? You're probably going to say something like, you know, polluting in a lake, but what kind of action would I take as a true egoist that would harm everybody else around me?
I don't know about everyone else around you, but let's just have a really simple situation where you end up better off and someone else ends up worse off. Let's say you steal something from someone, something of significant enough value that any risks that you may face by the chances of getting caught are compensated for by the benefit you gain from stealing that thing.
So stealing is an act of metaphysical evasion. It means that I was not worthy of my own production. Now, as a 35-year-old, I'm 40 now, but when I discovered this philosophy at 35, I used to steal CDs online, books. I used to download everything constantly.
Oh, intellectual property, that's another one.
Like everybody on the planet, and I thought that was perfectly fine. Now that I take being honest and being productive seriously, because I've seen for myself how being productive builds my self-esteem, something I didn't have before, something that goes along with human nature, I don't steal. So that situation would literally never happen because stealing is anti-human and it is using force against a fellow man, which I would never do.
So I agree with acting for your own benefit in some way, based on the way you're describing it. Right?
So my point is all actions I would take in my life are never at the detriment to anyone else, ever. Period. Zero. It cannot happen on purpose. You know, if I drive a car and the brake fails and I run over 3 people, that's not my fault. I'm talking about an actual action I take that harms other people. That would not happen.
So stealing, I think someone said something in the chat there that I think sums it up quite nicely as crass flam. So he says, so stealing is wrong because it hurts the self-esteem of the thief. Is that essentially? Right.
Yes.
So that is a cost associated with stealing, right? That is something that you would need to give up in order to steal, is perhaps some self-esteem, because you'd feel like, well, I wasn't able to actually get this honestly. By stealing this, I'm admitting I've failed, or something like that, right? However, that is just a cost, and it is a limited cost, right? There is no such thing as an infinite cost. So therefore, you would simply need to steal something of sufficient value that it compensates for that cost, and then it would be worth your while. Would you agree with that?
Hold on. Say that a little more slowly. I'm from Brazil. We have slow brains.
I see.
Can you repeat that?
Okay. So the loss of self-esteem is a cost that you would pay
Yes.
for stealing something.
No, I
However,
would never pay that.
if you were to steal something, that would be the cost you would pay, right? And therefore, you do not steal. However, if the thing that you are stealing is of sufficient value to you, surely at some point it will compensate for that cost and you will steal.
No, the material thing has no value for me. It is my productive nature and self-esteem that are the values that I seek. The material item is inconsequential to my value system.
Right. Okay, so that's sounding... I didn't expect that answer at all. So the material things are of no value to you. Are you sure?
Material things are a consequence of me seeking values as a rational human being. The material things themselves, in and of themselves, have no value. They are just things unless they provide a positive to my life. If I stole something, that is a negative to my life. So
No.
it would hold no value to me.
Hold on, if you stole something, it is a negative to your life because it affects your self-esteem. But it is also a positive because, like, let's say you stole $1 billion. Are you sure you're going to say that $1 billion has no positive effect on your life?
None. Zero whatsoever. None at
Okay.
all.
All right, so that's enough.
Let me give you an example. So I do a weekly show, right? And
Yes.
I don't normally disclose these sort of things, but you're being a very honest person with me, and I love this.
Okay.
So I do a show on the weekend, and I pay the guests that are on there, and each show that I do costs me up to $300 to make. So monetarily, doing 4 shows a month takes $1,200 away from me. And on Patreon, I make back, let's say, 120. So monetarily, I'm at a net loss, but the value I get from being productive, from talking to people, from surrounding myself with other wonderful intellectuals, even people that don't agree with me, we have great discussions, making online friends, infinitely more value to my life
Absolutely.
than that money ever represented.
Yeah,
So I
no,
will take that monetary loss for a spiritual gain.
I totally agree with that. In my conception of morality and of also just pragmatics of how you should act in your life, I think that there are definitely situations in which a monetary gain is not the desirable choice, right? And you can think of this in really simple situations, just buying something. If I purchase a cheeseburger and then I eat it, it's gone, but I wanted to sate my hunger. And so, therefore, it was worth it, right? We don't value money for money's sake. We value money because of the things that it can provide for us. Now, however, that only shows that some amount of monetary gain can be less valuable to you than some other kind of gain. It does not show that there is no benefit from a monetary gain. And if there is some benefit from a monetary gain, then presumably a sufficient amount of that benefit will be enough to outweigh the negative effects of having to steal it.
No, so stealing $1 billion would not outweigh the value of earning $10. Doesn't exist for me anymore.
$1 trillion.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't mean
Wow.
anything to me.
Are you sure?
Money is not the issue. It is my self-esteem. I lived 35 years thinking that way, and I was empty the entire time. Now, if I got a job that paid me a lot, that gave me value for the hard work, like a CEO, if I worked 200 hours a week, then all the money I get would probably be just a drop in the bucket with the amount of value I would get from being productive and exercising my mind.
Okay. I'm not saying that you ought to steal things, by the way. I think that there is a conception of morality that ought to prevent you from doing so. But I think that we've gone through that enough, and just to draw the distinction between our two philosophies here so the viewers at home can decide for themselves, I am not of the position that a monetary gain is always less valuable than the negative effects on your self-esteem of stealing something. I think sometimes it is in your self-interest to steal, and that is an unfortunate facet of reality, but nonetheless, you ought not steal. right? That because that is stealing causes harm to others, and other people's values ought to be included in your judgment of what to do. Therefore, you should still not steal. Okay. I understand you disagree with that, but I just want to leave that there so we've both put our different views out there.
Yeah, we move on. No worries.
Okay.
It's all good. Gucci fam.
Awesome. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to jump into, so we've done the is, ought distinction. Virtue of selfishness.
Oh.
Yes. Okay. So, in my video, I said that I think that Ayn Rand makes a way stronger case for the virtue of selfishness and the evil of altruism than I thought possible. That was one of the things I was most impressed by. However, I don't think she quite got there. I think that she got to the point where I could say, okay, altruism is way more fraught with problems than I thought it was, and selfishness has more positives than I thought it did. And the example I used was, I in my mind, I gave the abstract description of when selfishness was positive. In my mind, I had the example of what's his name, Reardon from Atlas Shrugged, and when I was thinking about it. But I'll just give the abstract version here actually again. So if you accept that it is a negative thing to expect altruism, expect self-sacrifice from others, to say, well, you should put my values before your own, right? And I think most people would be willing to say, yeah, that's not a great thing. Then we can say, well, okay, but if you therefore are selfless to someone, if you do sacrifice yourself to them, are you not teaching them that that's the kind of world that they live in? Right? That's the kind of that's something that they ought to expect, and that's something that'll work out for them if they do expect it, right? So that aren't you in some sense doing harm to them and making the world an uglier place by being altruistic? And I think that that's a really compelling argument. However, once again, when she does that, and this refers to both of the other points I've brought up, she's appealing to bad consequences. Therefore, it's consequentialism. She's also saying that it's not beneficial. It's not beneficial to you in any circumstance to be altruistic. And I'm not sure that I buy all of that. It seems that in some situations, it is a positive thing for the consequences of the world that we be altruistic, that we put other people's values, maybe not entirely ahead of ours, but in our valuation, right? That you ought to have in your value scale the fulfillment of others' values as well. Okay, so I think before I go into a specific question, I just want you to clean up what I've said there, because I'm sure you disagree with a lot of it.
I have to go back. These terms matter. I have to ask you simply, when you say consequentialism, you mean the greatest good for the greatest number, or do you mean something else?
I'd say the greatest good for the greatest number is a little bit loaded, but yeah, we'll go with that for now. Sure, greatest good for greatest number, close enough.
If the question is, if the standard for your actions are other people, objectivism does refute that outright. All your actions the outcome of all your actions, the beneficiary has to be you as the primary. If anyone else laps up some of your benefits as a secondary, that's fine. But your actions are completely, the consequences of those are for your benefit, nobody else's.
I agree to some degree, right? I agree that if you took an action, therefore you valued the outcome you believed you would achieve by taking that action, right? And so in that sense, yeah, everything you do is for your own benefit. But on the other hand, one of the values you have may be to benefit others. And I'm not sure if an objectivist would disagree, but I think that's perfectly fine. Like, I only act for the fulfillment of my own values by definition, but some of my highest values are the fulfillment of the values of others.
Okay, so I got you on this one. Here's an example. The great one of this would be teachers. So as a singular human being, a person may be compelled in some sense to be a teacher. That's fine. If you are seeking to be the best teacher you can be by your own standards, your values, your students will benefit from that. But if you take another person and they go into being a teacher, but their standard of their values are the students or the faculty as a primary, the collective, they are subverting their own judgment, their own mind, their own conclusions. They become bitter, resentful. They don't care what they teach. And then trying to be a utilitarian, they fail at doing so. In every example of a human being being egoistic, mainly through capitalism, all other ships will rise. But that person needs to focus all of his or her actions singularly into their life, into their needs, and everyone else around them will benefit as a consequence. Because to be a successful person, you have to produce something, you have to make something. We're not ghosts. You have to trade. And when you make the best thing you can be, whether you're a basketball player, a teacher, an astronaut, internet interviewer, the better ones will raise to the top. And if you do this following your own values, you'll be a better interviewer. But if you do this based on what people in Discord or what I say, we're supplanting your mind, and you won't make anybody happy in that sense.
Yes.
So I'm hoping I'm making a little sense there.
You are, but it also sounds very consequentialist, right? You're talking about the benefit to everyone. Like, that's
secondary. I'm saying
let me ask
it.
Let's ask a hypothetical. Let's ask a hypothetical. I'm going to abstract this so that we can't get into the weeds of how that situation would arise. Let us say that hypothetically there were some action you could take that would have an enormous negative impact on everyone else and a small positive impact on you. On net, this is saying, right? It's that the negative effects on your self-esteem or whatever are more than balanced out by the positive impact, right? Are you saying that simply this is impossible, it could never occur? Or are you saying that even if it were to occur, I would still act for my own benefit?
But that's the thing. I don't mind hypotheticals, but as an objectivist, I have to tie this back to a real-world example where I would do something that would harm everybody but benefit myself. I have to know exactly. I'd have to induce from these examples. I can't just use concepts divorced from reality.
All right.
Because I don't. If you could think of something, that would be fine.
Right. Well, I sort of tried to with stealing something with a high enough value such that it would counteract the the negative impact on your self-esteem. However, I suspect that if I came up with another example like that, you would similarly say that such a situation could not occur, that the negative effects on you would be so large that they would balance out. They would balance it out, and you still shouldn't do the steely thing or the killing thing or whatever it is. So I don't think I would be able to come up with such an example. And if you're not interested in going into the hypothetical, that's okay. You don't have to. So I want to move right on. So we've gone through some of the foundational philosophy parts. I want to get into some of the details.
Can I go back?
Okay. Yep. Last thing.
Let me see if I could try this. Can I give the example of the toxic sludge in the river? Can I give this example? Maybe
you expected me to say that, and you had a answer figured out.
Because I'm hungry to know what's in your mind, so I'm curious. Okay. So let's say I have a factory that, in my own selfish interest, I produce toxic waste, and the toxic waste goes into a river, and then that river poisons people. Certain questions have to be asked. Is that river mine? Is it on my property? If it is, those people shouldn't be there, and if they drank the water, that's their problem. There are signs that say don't do it. If that river is not mine, and I knowingly am dumping toxic sludge in that river, and I hurt people off my property directly, then there's a chance that I should be taken to court for hurting other people.
Yep.
So
I agree with every word.
Okay.
Yeah. No. So that's definitely my position as well. That. Granted, my justification for that position is a consequentialist one. It is that, society will work well if we set up the law such that property rights are clearly delineated, and so therefore anyone who is an owner of a property is incentivized to produce value with that property. And if you're not the owner of a property, you will be punished for destroying it or reducing fulfillment of value of that property. So that my justification might be different from yours, but the conclusion I agree with completely.
Yes, sir.
So I want to get into some of the conclusions, because there's two big things where objectivists, I have noticed, differ from a lot of libertarians really dramatically. Now, not all libertarians share my views on these, but I am opposed to the state entirely, and I am opposed to intellectual property. I don't think that that is legitimate property. So I'll let you pick. Which one of those do you want to go down first?
Oh, okay. I was typing something in chat, and I am a tiny Brazilian brain.
That's
Which
okay.
are the
I'll
two
go
options, please?
Okay, so the two options. Do you want to talk about intellectual property or anarcho-capitalism?
Oh my God, two things that I don't really delve too deep in. Let's go with the hardest of the two, intellectual property first.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick introduction here. So the common position is that you can own an idea, and so therefore I think that I ought to explain why I don't think that's the case so that you can combat that. The reason that you cannot own an idea is that property rights are determined because we cannot both use the same thing at the same time. If I have a stick and you want to use that stick, well, we can't both use it at the same time. Some property rights are going to need to be determined. Someone has to be the one to use the stick. If you have an idea and I also use that idea, then we both still have that idea. Right? And so therefore, property rights are not legitimate for ideas. Ideas are abstractions. They don't actually exist in reality beyond the neurons arranged in your brain. And you, in fact, own the neurons in your brain, and I own the neurons in mine. If I arrange my neurons into the same pattern as the ones in your brain, that does not lose me any ownership of said neurons. And so therefore, it's the same thing if I'm sculpting clay into the same shape as yours, arranging the zeros and ones on my computer to the same shape as yours, etc., etc. So property rights in intellectual things, in ideas, are not legitimate for that reason. Go.
Okay, so from what I see in that is another mind-body dichotomy. The way I view humanity is that our concepts come from reality, and then we regurgitate our concepts back into actions for self-sustaining action. So intellectual property and property are one and the same. The thing that the law protects is the individual mind. Now, if you have an idea and do not create a physical product to represent that idea, then it should not be protected by law. So if I came up with Seinfeld and I did not take the steps to create that show, a year later, someone else comes up with a show like mine called Soonfold, and they actually produce it. I cannot go to the government and say, I had that idea first. You have to put your idea into a physical thing first for legal protection. But
I would watch Soonfold.
But they are one and the same. Humans need to exert their ideas into nature to produce, to exist. You cannot live as a ghost. So as far as I'm concerned, intellectual property and property are one and the same. Now, if you're asking about very specific ways the law handles who comes first with the idea, how many years these things should hold, I can give you my opinion, but my opinion means squat into a technical field that's out of philosophy. In general, I think that if you can, let's say I created Seinfeld and I created the show, I'll hold the intellectual property for my lifetime and then it's gone. That's just it. That's not. I'm not saying that's dogma. That's just an opinion. Okay. But after a certain amount of time, it would go away.
After a certain amount of time. Well, that's another thing that's kind of weird about intellectual property, right? That's something that should give you a hint that perhaps it is not the same as regular property. That it has an expiration date. Right? There's no expiration. If I am, if I have
my mind is dead.
If I have a stick, sure. Right, but you can sell those rights, can you not? Or are you against the selling of intellectual property rights?
You could sell your property for the people. You can sell your ideas and say, I came up with this idea of this Remington razor. I no longer want the legal protection of making this. It's now yours, Mr. Danny. We write a contract and it may.
Hold on, but I think you're missing my point.
The idea and the razor are one and the same. You now have the ability to create this razor.
I think you're missing my point. So, if you have the idea for that razor, right?
Yes.
And you sell the idea for the razor to someone, does that mean that when you die, the idea they've purchased from you is now no longer theirs?
No, you'd have to produce the razor.
No, hold on. You're selling the idea you're selling the idea, like you're selling the patent for it.
You have to have a design, a patent, and maybe like a prototype.
You have the idea for the razor. You build the razor, and
Yes.
then you sell that person the rights to produce razors like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Now let's say then you die. Does that person who you sold the rights to now lose those rights because the original creator's dead?
No, I sold them, 50 years ago. I no longer have any right to them. They're his.
Okay. So in that case, intellectual property rights will never fade away because the person will, just before they die, sell it to someone else. It'll be their
Yeah.
rights now. And then,
Yeah.
wait, so you're okay with infinite intellectual property rights?
It's your property. It's your property. If
Wait,
you
hold
die,
on.
you can give off your property to other people.
So if some Indian thousands of years ago had copyrighted zero, he would own his estate would now own half of the data in the world.
Is he producing these zero pillows everyone's sleeping on?
No, I'm saying that like he
I gave the qualifier that you have to create something. You can't
yeah,
just
he
have
wrote
an
down
idea.
he wrote down zero. He wrote down that number, and now whenever
Yeah.
anyone uses zero, they owe him intellectual royalties. Do they not?
No.
Why not?
What does that mean? He owns the zero, the concept of zero.
Well, because okay, so in mathematics, right, using zero
Yes.
as a placeholder was invented thousands of years ago in India. If anyone
Mm-hmm.
ever does that, are they not infringing on that original creator's estate's property rights?
No.
Why not? It's an idea he came up with. He manifested it in
I don't
reality.
understand the question. I don't
Okay.
understand the question about. I don't understand the difference between a zero and an idea that you're producing
Okay.
as a productive person.
Right. So you have an idea.
See, I think you're
If the-
asking
if
a very
the- if the-
technical
if the-
question, like, are
if
you
the-
using the zero in a specific formula to create a chemical or something like that? Then maybe. But
Okay.
just the concept of a foundational axiom of mathematics, then no. I doubt you can own something like that.
But what if you came up with using zero as a placeholder, right? Because, like, sure, you won't own zero as in the concept of nothing, right? But you will potentially own zero as in the concept of using a symbol to represent an empty slot in a number, right? Because someone did come up with that. Can someone own that?
What damages did he suffer from me writing the number zero?
Well,
I don't understand what he's suffering.
It was his idea, and he's saying that you have to pay him to use that idea, right? Because he had the idea, he manifested it in reality, he started using it, right? And then he said that other people can use this also if they pay me, right? Is that legitimate? And if not, why
No,
not?
I don't understand what he's creating that he's being productive with and that he's selling.
Well, you don't think that's a productive concept?
Is he selling a novel that explains his theory behind the zero? He'll own the novel. He'll own the arrangement of words. He'll own the intellectual property for that novel. But he doesn't
Okay.
own the words He doesn't own the word dog or zero. I'm not
Okay.
connecting.
All right.
The
I might not be getting through on this one, so let me try a more recent example. You can't copyright a drink. Did you know that? Like, if you come up with a new recipe for a drink, for a cocktail, you're not allowed to copyright it. Is that okay, or should you be able to copyright a cocktail?
Well, my initial response to that is, I'm not dodging it. I haven't heard that, and it sounds weird that you can't copyright a drink. With my layman's understanding, if you create the blue mimosa and you have a specific ingredient that goes into it, I don't see why you could not copyright that drink. So
Okay.
I don't know why you can't copyright drinks.
Okay, so
That
you
sounds
should be
weird.
able to.
You produce the drink with specific ingredients of specific amounts, and people enjoy it, and it's yours, and I'm the originator of this drink. Sure, why not? I don't see a reason why you couldn't.
So
Seems
I'm a little
seems weird
alarmed.
that you can't.
I'm a little alarmed by how extreme your defense of intellectual property is, to be frank. You seem to want it to be able to last forever, provided the creator sells it before he dies, right? So, it's some idea that someone had for a wheel. The guy who originally invented the wheel, who first used it, his estate, if we knew what his estate was, should rightfully be able to continue to charge people for using wheels nowadays. It seems, right? That's I understand that is appeal to ridicule, but I mean.
No, I did qualify at the beginning that the length of IP ownage is a very technical legal question, and these are just my opinions. Once again, I'm not dodging the question. I am owning my answer that I give, but I am fine with certain limits if they can be objectively defined. Maybe after a lifetime it stops completely and you can't pass it. This is a very technical question that I can't
Okay.
give an objective answer to.
All
But
right. So you're
for a
not even
certain
sure.
amount of time, if you create something and you produce something, it's yours.
Hmm.
When that should expire, I gave a lifetime. That was that was my thing. But I don't
Okay.
know if it's correct or not.
All right. Okay. So let's
Yeah.
forget about the expiration date and things like that. And then let's just go back to the initial point of intellectual property there, which was if you write a book, right?
Yes, sir.
And I have some paper and some ink, and I arrange that paper and ink into the precise form of your book, right? Do I lose ownership of the paper and ink that I owned? Is it now
If you're-
yours?
So if I have, let's say, the Bible, and you take a blank book and you write out the Bible.
Yeah.
Now, in this example, someone would own that Bible or the
Yeah, let's
intellectual property.
let's say
for
the
that
real Bible.
Okay.
Let's say we take Atlas Shrugged, and I write out Atlas Shrugged in a book of my own. Right? Do I lose ownership of that book now because I wrote out a story someone had written before?
Once again, not dodging the question, but this is a very technical question of ownership. In my initial answer is that you would write the book out. No, the book and what you wrote is yours. You put effort into writing out an entire book. Good job for you. You could have saved money by ordering it on Amazon.
But
It's
I
your
copied
book.
it.
You copied it. Sure, keep it in your house, read it, use it as toilet, do whatever you want with it.
What if I sell it to someone?
Like you take that book and sell it. Are you selling it as Ayn
just sell it
Rand
to my friend.
rewritten?
I'm
Are
just
you-
saying
are you
Ayn
selling it
Rand as written in a book by Danny, and I sell Ayn Rand as written in a book by Danny, and I sell it to my friend.
This
Do
may
I-
not be a satisfying answer, but I can envision a society of objective laws that say, yeah, and you're selling it to one person and it's your idea, you took the time to do it. Sure. And I could see this another society right next door saying that if you're trying to pass off a copy of someone else's work, there may be repercussions for that. But I'm
Oh.
not too heavily weighed on either one. I haven't given
Hold the phone. If you've got two societies next door to each other and it's legitimate for both of them to behave different ways, that's sounding very non-objective, is it not?
No, because objectivism is not a dogma. It's just a set of rules. Each person has to seek their own value. So you can talk, like I said, you can talk to 20 different objectivists, and we're going to fight about the applications of for our lives. Which is why I am in complete support of multiple countries, just for this reason. The foundations might be the same, but the application in special sciences might be different.
Okay.
Whether it be playing sports or technical law.
I want to move along to anarcho-capitalism now because, we've been going for an
Jesus.
hour. I don't want it to go for much more than an hour and a half. So let's get into
Okay.
anarcho-capitalism. That is something that Ayn Rand was quite opposed to in some of the things that I've read. She was not too flattering of people who supported that system. What is your view of anarcho-capitalism?
All right. Okay. So I am taking a more benevolent and cheerful approach to this. So I'm not going to be antagonistic. But anarcho-capitalism, as I'm sure you may have heard from other objectivists, is that it is a concept that cannot exist. You're either a capitalist or an anarchist. There's no mixing of the two.
Okay.
Because, okay, I'm sorry.
What do you mean by so anarcho-capitalism as I define it, because this is the thing I want you to critique,
Yes, sir.
is simply a society in which there is capitalism but no government. And obviously that begs the question, well, what is a government, right? Since we probably agree on what capitalism is, what's a government? And I would say that a government is that entity whose use of force is legitimized by the society. So if someone steals from you, you run down the street and go stop thief, and you expect people to stop him, and the society does not treat that as legitimate, right? However, if the government steals from you, it's like, well, that's the government, right? And it's you treat that as legitimate, right? The society treats that as an acceptable thing for the government to use force when it would not be acceptable for anyone else. That's what I consider a government, and that's what I think should not exist.
So as a follower of a standard for individuality, I have the right to defer my self-defense to other people. Now, within a geographic context, humans are contractual animals. We do live by the meat of our own minds, but it behooves us and it benefits us to work together to achieve certain values and goals. And for humans to think long term, so if you and I were to, if we're neighbors and we're both writing a book together, okay, we're both authors of the same book, it would behoove us to know what the law of that geographic area is pertaining to our collaboration. So if we do come to a disagreement, we know well ahead of time what the consequences of that agreement is. So my issue is that government is not the primary. The laws that govern our action that we agree to are the primary, and the laws require enforcement.
Yeah.
Any body of people, any institution that has a monopoly of force in a geographic area to enforce those laws, by definition, is a government. And I know that word sends hairs up your
No, it's
spine,
not the word.
but
It's the
okay.
description, right? The monopoly of force.
So,
that's what I'm.
yes.
That's what I'm opposed to, right?
But that's how you enforce laws and enforce contracts.
It is one way of doing it, right? But it's
the only way of doing it.
No, it
It's
isn't.
the only way.
No, it
If
isn't.
two people-
it's
if two
empirically
people
not the only way,
If
right?
two people disagree,
Yeah.
unless they come to a peaceful resolution, which most people do,
Right. So that's
the
an alternative.
only result is force to
Yes.
get one point of view over the other person.
Hold on, you're making a leap here. You're leaping from you need to use force to enforce rights, right? And that is correct.
Yeah, to enforce.
That is correct. You need to use force to enforce rights. And therefore, we should have a monopoly on force. Like, let's apply that to literally anything else. You need food, right? So you can eat. And therefore, we need a monopoly on food production. That doesn't work, does it? Right? The fact that we need to use force to enforce our rights does not follow that we need a monopoly on force. And in fact, we should expect a non-monopoly provider, right? Some competing set of agencies who can provide the enforcement of your rights to produce it better. Right? We would expect that different agencies who would offer to, if some guy steals your stuff, we'll beat him up.
You mean different governments, right?
If you want to count that as a government, yes. But the reason I don't is that we don't treat that as a government, because that would be a security company. Is this?
Yes, but
hold the phone.
Yes, sir.
If we count that as a government, then you must also call every security company a government, because that is exactly what a security company does, right? They enforce your rights. If the enforcement of rights, if that's a government, then I'm in favor of governments, but then you have to start calling every security company a government. If that is not a government, if a security company is not a government, why? And I would say it's because the government is allowed to use force in situations other people would not be allowed to, where we would not consider that legitimate. I think that force should only be used in situations where it would be considered legitimate for anyone to use force in that situation. I don't have a special exception for the government.
Okay, so there's a lot there to unpack. Okay, so where to start? Okay, the reason why I would differentiate food from force is that force is the only thing that can stop a person from thinking. At the root, that is the enemy of human nature, to think and to produce. That's why force has a special category above everything else.
Which is why it's more important we don't have a monopoly in it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but you will always have a monopoly on force.
That's empirically
at all
not
times.
True. We don't have one now.
What do you mean? I live in America. I follow American rules. The American government has a monopoly on force and enforcing the laws.
No, it doesn't. The American government has a monopoly on the legitimized use of force, but there are gangs and mafias and petty criminals who use force all the time. So the US government does not have a monopoly on force even within its own borders. It has a monopoly on legitimized force in situations in which it would not be legitimate for others.
But okay, the way you're describing this is that unless the government, okay, I'm going to use, these aren't offensive terms, it's the best way to conceptualize it. So unless the government has some sort of magical power to control everybody to not use force, it does not have the monopoly of force. Is that what you're saying, or am I
Correct.
misreading what you're saying?
Correct. I'm not, and that's because I
Yeah,
don't
okay.
count the government as having a monopoly of force, because it simply does not have one. The government is not the monopoly, one provider, right? The only provider of force.
Yeah.
You can defend your own. Like there are legitimate and illegitimate uses of force within the U.S.
Yes,
right?
sir.
I could steal something for
Yes.
you could protect your property with your gun, right? So
Yes, sir.
both of those situations are uses of force, one legitimate and one illegitimate, right? The difference with the government is that it can just steal from you, right? If the government decides to start taking 100% of your income, well, that's just democracy, and therefore that is considered fine, right? That's not stealing. That's taxation, right? So in that, the thing that distinguishes government is not its use of force, not its monopoly on the use of force, because no one has ever had a monopoly on the use of force anywhere ever. It is the monopoly on legitimized uses of aggressive force, which for everyone else is considered illegitimate.
I'm with you on that so far.
Okay, so the government, right? If I say, well, I don't think the U.S. government, all right, I'm an American like you. Are you actually American? You sound American.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay, so I'll go with America then. I'm an American, and I don't want the US government to protect my rights because I think they're doing a shitty job. It's like, no, don't protect my rights anymore. I'm going to hire a different agency to do it, right? And I'm going to stop paying you the taxes that you would want for that service, right? Am I able to do that?
No.
Right. And that is unlike any other organization in society. The government's use of force is legitimized. Use of aggressive force is legitimized, right? I haven't harmed the government. I'm just saying, don't want to do business with you anymore. I'm just saying I want to use a different provider. I think you're doing a bad job. The government's allowed to just say, well, too bad, we're taking your stuff, and you'll receive whatever level of rights protection we deem fit to give you. Right, so that is why I am opposed to the government, and that's how I define a government, right?
So,
Okay.
yes, I define a government not a use of aggressive force. I define a government as an institution that defends individual rights. Do we have that today? No. So I'm in agreement with you that taxation and the initiation of force is immoral, and a government has no province in initiating force against anyone, period.
Well, ought it? So let's say, in objectivist society, like you have this, everyone accepts objectivism, and you have this objectivist society, and everything's going swimmingly, and I say, you know what? I think that the government is not doing a good job of protecting my rights. In that situation, would I be allowed to opt for a different rights protection agency?
Okay. So we are in a geographic area. We are in a free market society that has a government. So we have a set of laws we all follow. So you want to have, I don't know, McDonald's Corporation enforce the same laws the government is enforcing. Is that what you're asking, or am I misreading what you're saying?
The generation of laws is a different service from enforcement of those laws. So despite the fact that I do also advocate for private production of laws, I won't go into that now. I'll just say the enforcement of those laws. I want to use a different I don't want the police to protect my rights, and therefore I will not pay the police. I will want someone else to.
Fine. As long as that security force has the go-ahead from the government to do certain things under a contract.
Hold on.
Hold on. Wait. And it follows the government mandates for its actions, then no problem. I don't see an issue with that.
Okay, so in an objectivist society, I could refuse to pay the government's police force, and so no money would go from my pocket to the government's police force, and instead I would hire a different agency to perform that service for me. Would that be acceptable in your objectivist society?
In this highly technical question, I would assume that this police force that you are paying instead of the government,
let's say service for cheaper.
So if you were to, let's say, someone comes on your property and commits a crime against you, and you don't want the local police to arrest the guy, okay? You have your own private dog, the bounty hunter, okay? They go in there, they get the person, they turn him over to the local police force and government, and you're going to go to a government court anyway.
Wait a minute. But do I have to use the government, why do I have to turn them over to the police force? I just want my agency to go to the local court and take the guy, take him to the local court and say, this guy's guilty, and get their stamp of approval, and therefore my enforcement agency locks them up in their own jails.
No, jails cannot be privatized. It can only be under the purview of the government.
Why?
Because it's an institute of force.
So is you defending your own land with your own gun. Absolutely,
you can do that. Absolutely.
But that's privatized.
That's an emergency situation. That's not.
Hold on.
That's not necessarily burglary. That's someone's on my property, and I have a right to defend my life. And if I hired a security guard, like many celebrities do, and if the celebrity gets rushed and the security guard does something, they're still following the laws of the land, but the celebrity has deferred their immediate protection to that security. Now, if that security does something to the aggressor that is against the law, then the security firm would be dragged in front of a court and punished accordingly.
Sure, I agree with that. So, but hold on.
Here's the thing. Whenever I talk to somebody like you, they say something different because they want to enforce their laws.
Yes.
You said that you're okay with enforcing the accepted laws of a geographic area.
Hold on. No.
Okay. All right.
That is not my preference, but similarly to how I might argue for the let's say we're in the Soviet Union and I want to privatize the production of cars, and you're saying, well, what about the roads? And I'll say, well, for the sake of argument for the moment, let's just leave the roads public, right? I just want the private cars to be able to drive on the public roads in that case. I may also advocate for privatized roads, which I do. However, the point is that I'm just talking about the privatization of this institution, and I want to see if that would be acceptable. I'm testing the limits of your objectivist society by saying, well, what if this specific institution or even part of the institution were privatized?
Well, two things. First, there would be no such thing as an objectivist society. The government would have no role in ideas, zero. It would not push any ideas of any kind. No objectivist ideas, no communist ideas, period.
That's fine.
The government would literally be buildings filled with people doing nothing until rights have been violated.
Sure.
That's it.
I'm fine with, look, when I say an objectivist society, I mean that society, the society you advocate. I don't mean one in which the government, has objectivist ideas necessarily, just in which they conform.
I had to make sure I've said that out there. Trust me, I had to say that for my own sake. Trust me.
Fair enough. I'm sure you did for the audience's sake as well. Okay.
No, it was for me. I don't care about the audience.
All right. Yes, egoism. I forgot.
This interview is for me, baby.
Okay. Good. All right. So I think that I didn't quite get to the end of that train of thought there because, you've got your. I'm for the moment granting that you have your state-enforced has a monopoly on law, right? I guess right now I'm arguing for the medieval Icelandic situation in which law is of the government, but the enforcement of those laws is private. Right, which is essentially what they had there, and I think also in times in England, but my history is not that good yet. I'm still learning. But in any case, that's the concept, right? That you have government laws, but the enforcement is all private, right? The government the government just writes their legitimizing decree. It's like you take someone before the government court, and they say this person is guilty. And therefore, it is considered, because the government did that, it is considered legitimate for my security agency to therefore, I don't know, lock that person up or whatever. And if not,
I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
I know what you're saying. So I'm not a nominalist. I don't overlay words over reality. So if you have a government without a police force, you just had a body politics that wrote the laws, and certain guilds would go to this body politic and they would say, we have to go, and the body politic would say, go enforce the law in this area. Those three guilds are the government. They're not private. So as soon as anyone has a monopoly of force,
but that's not a monopoly. We just said there's three competing ones.
No. The standard is the monopoly on force to enforce the laws, not just the monopoly of force. You can still defend yourself on your property. You can still hire private security
hold
to
on.
take you from one venue to another. The standard is the laws that are being enforced.
Okay, hold on.
That's what. Yes.
You said that there were multiple guilds, and I can hire
Yes.
whichever one I like to arrest people who harm me, right?
No, you would hire them, and they're gonna arrest whoever breaks the laws.
Yeah, but they wouldn't arrest people who didn't harm me. They'd arrest the people who harmed their customers.
No, there are no customers here.
Well, that's the situation I'm advocating for. It's like, so you're allowed to keep your government laws, right, for the moment. I'll let you keep them for now. And
thank you, sir. Thank you.
But the enforcement has to be has to be private, because, like, what right does one organization of enforcement have to say that we are the only legitimate one? Someone else who wants to do the exact same thing as us, following all the same laws as us, may not, right? That's the unjustified initiation of force. So I'm against that. So I want to hire one agency. You want to hire a different one. The thing is that both of these agencies would be adjudicated by this government court for the moment, right? Is that legitimate? May I hire a different agency, or do you want to enforce your one agency of enforcement upon me?
You see, I'm going to piss off a lot of people by saying this, but I'm very friendly to your idea on the surface of it, because you have one set of laws, and it doesn't matter if Diego wears a government uniform or a McDonald's uniform. If they are the executor of enforcing those same laws to bring people to a court for a fair trial, whoever's wearing the uniform doesn't matter. And as far as I'm concerned, they're all the government. And I know that me calling everything the government may not be conducive to what a lot of people are saying.
That's fine.
See, I'm friendly to what you're saying. I constantly come up with people coming to me and saying, okay, let's say you have Florida. Florida has X amount of laws, but Miami is Sharia law, like Muslim law. And they want to hire their police force to push their Muslim law. No, when you came into Florida, you have accepted to go by the law of the area. You cannot enforce any laws that trample on anyone else's individual rights. That's what I'm against.
Okay, so in that situation, I'd say that we have government laws and private enforcement of those laws. You would say that because those agencies are working so closely with the government, they essentially are the government.
I will go with that. I'm friendly to that idea, yes.
Okay, in that situation, let us now take the next step and say, well, I am single, I might have a different worry, like about laws. I might find that the government's chosen adjudicators are unjust. They make too many mistakes, right? They are not, in fact, enforcing just laws. They are enforcing. They're badly enforcing the wrong laws. So therefore, I will say, well, when I'm doing my business deal with this other person, right, we'll get private arbitration. We already have that. You can't possibly be opposed to that. Private arbitration. We won't.
I'm for that, 100%.
If there's a problem with this business deal, then we will both agree to abide by the rules of a private arbitrator, as opposed to abiding by the rules enforced by the government. Right. So we have got. Okay, that's fine. What if our security agencies do that? Is that legitimate? They say that, if two of our customers have some kind of disagreement, they will say, okay, if in this situation, if like one of our customers says someone from your one of your customers stole something, right? Then what we'll do is we will say that there'll be this private arbitrator who we think is more just than the government ones, and we'll go to him instead, and he will settle the dispute. Right? Is that legitimate?
On the surface of it, no, that's not legitimate.
Why?
Because now we're talking about you're talking about like a corrupt judge, a corrupt politician. Is that what you're saying? That a local judge or a local lawyer that is of the government is not executing the laws objectively, I guess.
I think that they're not doing a very good job, or maybe they're even doing a passable job, but I think this other group does the same job for cheaper, right? There is some reason that this other arbitration organization is better than the government courts. Right? Are you going to say, are you going to enforce your will upon mine, expect me to sacrifice for your government agencies there, for your government courts, and create a monopoly on this industry of arbitration?
No, there is no enforcement of my will. There is just the enforcement of the law.
Which laws?
The laws that we have agreed to follow in this geographic area. Yes.
Okay, hold on. So we have agreed to follow these laws, right?
Yes.
But I didn't. I agreed to purchase services from my agency, which agreed to an arbitrator with this other agency, who has a customer who's agreed to have his rights enforced. So that's the agreement me and this other guy have made. Why should we abide by your alternative agency instead?
So you said at the start of that, I don't know if that was a slip. So you said that you didn't. So you said you didn't agree for the laws of the area. Did you mean that, or did you mean something else?
I meant exactly that. The laws in the area, as defined by, or I'll make it a little bit clearer. The laws of your specific organization that you advocate, right? This one that you're calling a government, that organization I think is illegitimate, is enforcing the wrong laws, and so I am not agreeing to them. I and this other guy who lives here, we're agreeing to our own arbitrator, our own rights enforcement agencies.
So you have a choice then. You have a choice. Okay. You can either do what Yaron Brook did. He moved to Puerto Rico to circumvent the laws he did not agree with in California, or you can bravely wave your flag in Waco and take on the government. You have those two choices.
Wow. So wait, so hold the phone. If it's legitimate in Waco for me to resist the government, morally, then it's morally legitimate for me to have any agency I want and to just not go along with this government. And so you don't seem to believe in a government if by that you mean the monopoly on legitimized force. Because you're saying that it's perfectly legitimate for me to resist this government.
So this is a question, because I have to ask these metaphysical questions, because, it's good being the abstract. For you and your security force, are you transgressing the rights of others? Like, are you abusing children or stealing from people?
No, we're just
serious honest question.
What? Honest question? Am I actually stealing from people? No.
No, so I don't understand what you wouldn't agree with the local government if you're not doing the things that the local government has already said not to do. I don't understand where the conflict is.
I just don't want to. No, it's like I agree with their laws. I think they've pretty much got them right. I just think that their arbitration's too expensive.
I'm in agreement with you 100%. Yes.
Yeah, their arbitration's too expensive,
Absolutely.
so I'm going to get my agency to go with a different arbitrator, and I will not agree. My agency will therefore not agree to go with the government arbitrator, because I don't want to pay this.
I will. Okay, when I said I agree with you 100%, the context was what we have today through taxation, bloated government, a mixed economy. It is way too expensive. And I'm going to go ahead and walk into some territory I know I shouldn't in this discussion this late. But if the government were a volunteer government, the cost of it would be so cheap that I don't think the cost would be an issue of why you'd want to pick another security firm.
Let's say I did.
It would cost you pennies.
You could. That's dodging, right? Because I'm not asking about whether you agree with my analysis that this government.
So you just want different people in a different uniform enforcing the same laws? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that there may be some legal differences, but right now I'm just saying, let's say that right, I think that the agency you're calling a government has the laws broadly speaking correct, but I would like the arbitration, the judge to be from this other organization that does the same service just as well, I think, and cheaper.
And I guarantee you, I'm gonna steel man you here, because I guarantee you that if you are in an area where you have a local judge, a local lawyer that's kind of corrupt, and you have a Judge Judy and the lawyer or government, they're both following the same law, but you're going to get a fair trial with Judge Judy. If you and the other person could agree to go there, because the other person still has to agree to do it, and you arbitrate through Judge Judy is still following the laws, getting approved, then yeah, go ahead and do that. You don't have to go to a corrupt court.
These laws are not approved by the government, right? They went through
which laws?
the laws that are enforced by this third-party arbitrator are nothing to do with the government. None of us agree to abide by the laws of the government. It just so happens that the laws that our agency enforces happen to be compatible with the government, but there is no requirement for them to be approved by them. So if that's a little bit too abstract, let's change the situation a little. Let's change a little. No, I want to change the. I want to change the situation. Hold on.
You have two countries next
hold
to
on.
each other.
I just want to change the situation slightly. I want to
Yes,
change.
please. Okay. Go. Yes, please.
So no, there aren't two countries next to each other. This is me, my next door neighbor, have different different enforcement agencies, right?
Yes.
Who agree to one arbitration agency, and me and the guy across the street also have different agencies which agree to yet another arbitration agency. So if I get into a scuffle with the guy across the street, we'll go to a different arbitrator than if I get into a scuffle with the guy next door. Okay, that's the situation.
Okay, yes.
Now, let's say that there
so
are
far.
some legal differences. For example, you agree with intellectual property, as we've established. Let's say that they have different expiration terms for intellectual property, right? One of them has a much shorter one, and being opposed to intellectual property in general, I'd prefer that, right? I prefer to go with the one that has a shorter period for the intellectual property. Is that legitimate? They have a different laws, right? I think that these laws are better, and I will therefore contract with an organization that's going to guarantee me this arbitration agency, as opposed to one with a longer period for intellectual property.
I mean, if you're in your little neighborhood of Miami and you want to enforce your Sharia law on each other, then create your own little country.
So you're making a mistake here. It is not geographic at all. It is like picking a cell phone provider. The arbitration agencies that we will agree to are based only on the agreements between our enforcement agencies, nothing to do with where we live, right? I might use the same arbitrator with my next door neighbor as I use with a guy halfway across the country, but I would use a different arbitration agency, because there'd be a different contract between our enforcement agencies, with the guy right across the street. Okay, so it's not geographic. It's just we have different arbitration agencies that different enforcement agencies have agreements with to go by their decisions, and that's how the law comes about.
So the way I'm hearing it is that you and your neighbors each have your own set of laws and your own private gangs to enforce those laws against each other.
Yeah,
I know I use private gangs as the pejorative. I know I did that.
That's fine.
Pejorative.
I don't mind. Private gangs. Yeah, we've got a private gangs, and they each have agreements with one another to, in the case of a conflict between their customers, they will enforce it various ways, or they'll go to various arbitrators, and the end result of that is the laws, right? The end result of that negotiation process, that's what the law is. And the law between me and you might be different than the law between me and someone else. And it's totally irrespective of geography.
You have, I'm not asking your personal life, but you have a career, you have a job, right? Like you do something, right?
Sure.
Okay, so you have to travel to a place, maybe, don't say it. If you work at home, don't say anything, but let's say you travel to a place. How would you live long term as a thinking human being if going down this road you pass by 3 different mafia neighborhoods or 3 different...
No, not mafia neighborhoods. That's like saying there's an AT&T neighborhood, and that's like saying there's an AT&T neighborhood and a T-Mobile neighborhood.
There are different people with different gangs, and the minute you go down the wrong road, they're going to enforce their will on you.
Why?
How can... Because you broke their law. You're driving the wrong color car on their street.
I don't... Okay. If
it doesn't
they
matter
are willing...
if you agree
Hold on. I'm not talking about whether I agree with that. Don't assume my answer. Okay. So, yeah, if those people are willing to give up a significant cost, right? They're willing to pay their enforcement agencies quite a lot to get the contract with our enforcement agencies to enforce such a extreme law, like don't drive down the street in the wrong color in X area, then okay. But the main thing that you're missing here is, once again, these are not geographic. You are thinking of it like there's a gang that enforces law in this area, and there's a gang that enforces law in that area. That is not what I'm saying. It's any more than you would have one neighborhood. You go into this neighborhood, and T-Mobile provides cell phone service in this one. In this other neighborhood, there it's Verizon. Are those both cell phone companies in America? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Those are awesome. I got it.
They're shitty, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
so yeah, they both provide services to the same area, and it's not like geographic. It's just which person do you want to come to protect you when there's or enforce your rights when some rights violation happens. Who do you want to come, and what agreements do they have with other agencies? That's the product that you're going to buy from them. And I don't think that laws like, driving the wrong car on a street that I happen to live on, I'm willing to give up a significant amount of money, right, to my agency to not have such a law. I think that the person who wants that law is probably not willing to give up quite as much, and so therefore he will not get it.
Woof, man, you sure do want to live in a complicated neighborhood, my friend. Woof. I tell you what, man.
It's complicated in the inner workings of it, like any industry is. Like, I don't understand the full supply chain of McDonald's, but all I would know is, hey, get us as an agency. Or insurance is a perfect example of this, right? I don't know all the details of the insurance, but I know that, broadly speaking, this insurance agency seems to pay out pretty well. And similarly, I know this enforcement agency seems to protect people's rights. It's got a lot of great contracts with other enforcement agencies. I can be sure that my rights are going to be enforced effectively. I'm going to go with this one, right? Yeah. It's just like buying insurance.
Yes, just keep in mind that all the insurance companies do follow the exact same set of laws, so they know how to plan their businesses. They know what not to violate, et cetera, et cetera. Each insurance company, all insurance companies in America have to follow the exact same federal laws. And if you're in a state, you have to follow those laws. Each insurance agency cannot just arbitrarily change the laws to suit the whims of their emotions or their customers. So once again, I'm okay with.
I've worked in insurance, and that's empirically not quite right. It is true that there is some, like, if you want to say that ultimately, right, there is a government court backing up most of this sort of stuff, then yes. However, not always. Not always. So they'll have an arbitration clause, usually in insurance contracts. So one insurance company, like this, that's car insurance. One insurance company will have an agreement with another insurance company when we get into these accidents all the time, our customers keep crashing into each other, and then we have to go to these government courts to figure out who's gonna get paid out. This is a fucking waste of money. And so what they empirically actually do in reality is they will get some third-party arbitrator, and that arbitrator may have certain rules and standards and patterns that are not present in the government courts. So they will in effect have an additional layer of laws on top of it. Right? So they will have some different standards, some regulations, some laws, if you will, by which they interact with one another that are not created or enforced by the government, that are only enforced by this contract.
Everything they come up still has to be enveloped within the laws of the land.
It has to be legal.
That's what I'm saying. Okay.
If that's all you're saying, then sure. But I just want to know where's the cutoff point. How much of that law can be taken over by the private sector, right? Because you're agreeing now there can be these private contracts that would function a lot like laws, but how much of it can be taken over by the private sector, right? Where's this cutoff point where it's like, okay, these last few things, these need to be controlled by the government, but the rest of the laws or the rest of the standards by which our enforcement agencies interact, those have to be the government. Why and where? So
once again, not dodging. This is a very technical question, but I'll give you my opinion on this. If it's deferring immediate self-defense, like if you're a celebrity, if Mr. Danny, you become very famous, and you do legitimately get death threats and you're on the road, you can't have the FBI following you or whatever you have down there in Upside Down Land. You can hire a security firm, to protect you for immediate danger. Maybe even a private investigator to look at, emails or whatnot. But ultimately, any kind of decision, any judicial decision making would have to be turned over to the state. So that's what. So can I hire a private security force to go look for the guy that stole my wallet earlier today. Maybe find him and break into his house. In my opinion, no, that would be something that in official capacity the government would do.
Okay.
Can a private agency immediately defend myself? Defend me? Yes. I would even say, to an extent, let's say you like Dog the Bounty Hunter, and for some reason, him and his agency, they're in with the government. Okay, this is just I'm throwing some bones out here.
Yeah, I like this.
And the government does say, you guys are executing the police work here. We're short on police. They go out, Dog does his bounty hunter thing and captures his guy for you. It would now maybe go to a court. Well, it'd have to go to a court. If the law system is by jury, then guilty, goes to a prison. So where can the line be drawn? I am friendly to many different ideas where the line can be drawn. Ultimately, here's my fear. Ultimately, what the scenario that cannot happen would be, let's say I steal your wallet and I'm your next door neighbor, then you get Dog the Bounty Hunter to come arrest me, but then take me to your backyard, we have a trial, and then you cut my hand off.
Okay.
That's not what I'm for. It would still have to be in a public trial with a set of known as objective as possible laws to define what the punishment, what the leeways are, etc. But nothing like private justice or vigilantism. I'm completely against that.
So there's one last thing I want to get into, and it's the same basic topic, but it's a different kind of angle. And we've been going for quite a long. I've really enjoyed this so far, and
you're the man. I love this.
Yeah,
this
awesome. Is good. So we'll try to cap it off pretty soon. But you keep saying you want objective law. A government is either, a democracy where people vote on who's going to be put in place, or it's a monarchy where it's hereditarily decided. These don't seem objective. Or it's it's a constitution written by even if it's like a constitution and the government only enforces that constitution. It does nothing else and can never do anything else. No democracy or anything. Just the government enforcing these specific set of laws. Even then, written by some set of people who will have their view on what they believe that the laws ought to be, and they will write those down and will be enforced and interpreted by other people. That does not seem very objective. What does seem objective to me is the market. When you have the government determining the price of rice, that is a very unobjective. It's random, subjective price of rice. And what type of car to produce? Random. And the empirical results of this are rather fucking terrible when the government tries to control over either of those things. The government determining something makes it less objective, not more. And therefore, why is a legal system produced on the market not more objective? Because it's based on the individual interactions of all these conscious actors. So the end result of all these conscious actors interacting and agreeing and all this voluntary association. That seems far more objective to me than a democratic or monarchical or even constitutional system.
So what's the question?
Well, I'm going to use the Gene Epstein out here and go, well, how about that? Just put that at the end to make it a question.
All right.
Well, how about that?
So, first of all, prices are objective. Second of all, I'm against the democracy. I'm against the monarchy. I'm fine with a constitutional republic.
Wait, hold on. That's some democratic involvement there. It's a constitution involved there. It's not very objective. It's not based on market interactions, so it's not very objective there.
Because objective means based on the nature of man and reality. So the laws would have to hold man's individuality as the basis of all laws. Right. You cannot vote away someone's law.
Exactly.
So I do not. So I'm against voting. That's a form of authoritarianism.
Exactly, and therefore it should be all determined by market decisions, which are objective.
Yeah, well, just markets, like me buying your hamburger? Sure, yes.
Yeah, that determines an objective price of a hamburger, quality of hamburger, type of hamburger, way of producing hamburger. Yes. And similarly, if you want an objective way that laws are produced, it'll be identical.
No, the laws are apart from the whim of man. What we decide on a burger... What we decide on a burger, we can decide on the price of a burger.
Yes.
Once a law is set, and if it protects the individual, there is no playing with that law. Now, over time, if the education and philosophy of a society deteriorates, then yes, those laws will change to reflect the people, as long as they keep accepting subjective standards for their actions or intrinsic religious standards for their actions. You're going to get chaos if chaos is your standard, if you don't have your life as the standard for your laws.
Okay.
So it's a constant thing. It's a constant thing to educate over time, generation and generation. It's not once you do it in 1550, 3,000 years from now, it's going to be the exact same thing.
Okay. Including the term of copyright. That's going to be the same.
Oh, good God. Dude, bro, you're killing me here, man. Good Lord.
Okay. In any case, I think that we should probably bring it to the end here. So I just want to, before we close it out, I just want you to tell us, do you have any like summing up thoughts about objectivism? Like, has this conversation made you reconsider anything? Has it made you understand the libertarian position? Well, what are your takeaways here, if you've got some?
Has it helped me understand your libertarian position? Yes. Fair. I know more about your position than I did before. Have you opened up my mind to different ideas? Yes, you have. You have introduced new ideas for me, and very interesting ideas. And I'm not saying this facetiously, okay? And overall, my views as a young student of philosophy, they're all my views. They're not the views of the philosophy proper. They are how I interpret the rules, and I still have a lot of learning to do. So that's my fail-safe. That's my fail-safe. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And I would say a similar thing. This has definitely taught me a lot about what objectivism is, which frankly is the point of this series, right? Getting different libertarian subgroups, or in this case, a perceived but not actual libertarian subgroup, right?
Fair enough.
And seeing what the schisms.
You're friendly, so you're good with me. You can call me whatever you want. You're awesome in my book, bro.
Yeah. So the point of this,
I like you. I like you more
than
many objectivists. Let's put it that way.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yes.
But yeah, so the point of this series was to get a better understanding of different groups that are related to or part of libertarianism, and I'll say objectivism is at least related to it. We're still fellow travelers in the free market world. So yes, I think we've done that to some degree. So thank you very much for that. Where can people find you?
On the internet.
Don't want to give
I'm horrible with self-promotion. No, will you have links in the description?
Yes, I've already put them in there.
For my Twitter. Then thank you very much for providing that service for me. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right,
a question. Do you still plan on showing up on my show next week, or have plans changed? Okay.
No, I am all about that. So, your show, I believe, is usually hosted by a couple of other people, including the rather well-known Rucka Ali. Is he going to be there?
Rucka. Yes, him and his nihilistic filth music will be there. Absolutely.
Okay, it's nihilistic filth music. I don't know. I kind of like his music. I kind of like his music.
I don't. It's nihilistic. I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm going to get my ass read for this. Yeah.
The libertarian likes the music. Oh, the fellow objectivist doesn't. I don't know.
So, yeah, and Mr. Kirk Wilcox might be there as well, and maybe one or two other people.
Fantastic.
The idea for my show is I get questions during the week, and we just have fun answering them. I cannot guarantee your safety from the other guests on the show. But when you're on my show, you're there as a guest. I'm not there to put you on the spot for anything. You're there to answer questions just like anybody else. But
okay, fantastic.
Everyone has free will on my show, so get ready for whatever might happen.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Diego, and we will stop it there. Thanks for watching, everyone, and bye-bye.